The Willits City Council to order for, what date is it? May 25th. Could we all rise and join Larry in the pledge?
Please rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Let's see who's here.
Okay. Councilmember Stransky?
Yes.
Strong?
Yes.
Madrigal?
Yes.
Ornstein?
Here.
Mayor Burton?
Here. So in order to accommodate Councilmember Madrigal, we are going to adjust the calendar slightly, the agenda slightly, and move item 4, the consent calendar, up to item 1A or 1B or whatever you want to call it. So this item includes a resolution ratifying action taken by the City Council on May 11th approving a request of the Environmental Remediation Trust to sell the former Vimeo hydraulics facility to the surrounding properties to the Ed Mitchell Group. I have a conflict of interest in that, so I'm going to step down and hand over the gavel to Vice Mayor Ornstein. And when that item is, consent items concluded, I'll be looking forward to rejoining you.
Okay, we have the consent calendar. Do we have a motion to accept the consent calendar or any comments?
I would like to take 11B, not 11, 4B off as a, so we can discuss it.
Okay.
I'll move to approve 4A, the minutes.
Did we see May 11th?
No, they've been removed.
Okay, so
Okay, sorry, I don't have the updated.
April 13th and 27th.
Yes.
I'll second that.
Okay. All in favor of approving consent calendar item A, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Okay. Item B, the resolution. Madge.
Okay, well, I somewhat expressed my concerns last time, 2 weeks ago, that I think the public wasn't given sufficient notice to really meaningfully participate in the discussion that we had on May 11th. And in looking a little bit further and making some phone calls, I don't feel like I and maybe the other 3 of us council members may not have been given a lot of information in advance either on certain aspects. And I just, I feel that it's just not appropriate to make this very important decision. And I'm not saying that we're making a wrong decision or that we have really many options available to us, because I understand that we have very limited discretion under the court decree. But by taking this action May 11th and then ratifying it today, we're pretty much committing ourselves to the development that is being, being sold to. And yet, of course, obviously, we still have other kinds of reviews coming up later on land use. But, we want to see it happen, and yet we're not really given full information, and the public was not given full information in advance at all of this pretty important decision that's before us. There were things that happened way back in August last year that I was not aware of until May 10th, the day before. And actually, some of it that we weren't aware of until May 11th when we got the handout from the Mitchell Group regarding their proposed phasing and cost estimates. Just, I think for the record, I was led to believe all this time, way back in August, that the skunk train was not responsive to the city's request for that kind of information, phasing and cost information. And talked to Robert Pinoli recently, and he said he sent me copies of something that he says he submitted back in mid-August, which was very responsive, equally responsive. So I don't think we can undo whatever has transpired, and the trust is really in the driver's seat on this because they own the property and they're free to sell it as they see fit with whatever conditions they see fit. But I just don't think this was handled, certainly not in a transparent manner, and public was not given sufficient opportunity to weigh in on something that's really going to determine a very important land use decision for the city.
Holly?
So I agree with some of your points and disagree with others. I've certainly gotten feedback over the past 2 weeks about my vote, because just to remind people, I was in support of waiting until this meeting to do the official action, even though we weren't going to be getting any more information, just because I thought it was important for the public and transparent, information that we had to be carried over. But as we know, that didn't pass, because when it's a tied vote and there's only 4 of us, and that means no action. And that's why I was willing and interested in accepting the motion that I made, which was to move forward. And I have certainly gotten feedback, but in this intervening 2 weeks, I haven't gotten any information that has led me to believe that I should reconsider my vote. So in that sense, the vote has been taken. So unless one of the other council members that are in favor of, wanting to reconsider it, you bring up a point. Well, for one, I feel like we have been transparent, and the trust is in the driver's seat, and they provided us with information about the skunk train portion. And why that didn't go through. And I certainly understand Mr. Pinoli's disappointment, but at the same time, it was his choice not to sign the revised, updated contract. I mentioned before, I'm a big supporter of the skunk train. I really like the idea of them using that facility. But because of where things are, the way forward is to pass this resolution. So I don't think that by not passing the resolution, or by I don't think that there's interest in this, but I don't think that anyone wants to rescind the prior action. But I don't think that that's a reasonable way for us to move forward. And I understand that the community wants to have input and say in this very large piece of property that's in town. I completely understand that. And I don't feel like that door has closed. The development proposal that was put forward still will need to be reviewed by the city council. It will, taking this, committing to the resolution, will allow the buildings to stay up and the purchase to go forward, but no project is going to happen there without being seen by the city council. And I think that is really our chance to make sure that it fits in well with the downtown design, that it meets all the environmental regulations, all the good stuff like that. So I think that there will be continued opportunity for public input.
Larry?
I have maybe a little different view on it. Trent, I see it as a private individual, which is the trust, selling it to another private individual. And other than the building staying up and the foundation staying up or taken down, that is essentially all that we have to say on it, essentially, for me, as far as I'm concerned. And I've stated that throughout the full time that I've been, on the council, and we've talked about this. When it's a private enterprise that is buying a piece of property, you can certainly go to the owners of the property and say, gee, I would really like to see this, or don't let this happen, or whatever. But as far as government entering into it, as far as telling them what to do and what not to do, I don't see that we can do that. And, when I bought my building, I certainly didn't come to the council and say, I'm buying my building, what do you want me to do? I mean, I just did it and bought it, and Virginia and I did what we wanted to do. We started rebuilding it and this kind of thing, and, hopefully I've done what the community wants. But it's private enterprise. I mean, it's not the city. I mean, the city has no hold on it. It's just that all they had to do is whether the building stayed up or went down. And that's all I have to say. Thank you, Ron.
Okay, thank you. You know, the actual fact is, I have to disagree with you, Madge, on the statement that there was a lot of information that we didn't know about until 24 hours before the meeting. That's absolutely not true. The city council knew everything. They knew that the skunk train had refused to renew their contract with the trust like 6 months ago. We knew that. And we knew that. The presentation that was made by the Mitchell Group 2 weeks ago, we knew that as well. We learned some new information, but it didn't change anything. It was still the same, pretty much the same project that they had presented to us all along. So, you know, I have to tell you, I'm not thrilled when this thing is presented as being secret meetings and not full disclosure. And, you know, I gotta tell you, I'm tired of reading about this stuff in Facebook and in some of the newspapers in town, and, you know, it's just wrong. And it's wrong. It is wrong information, and it needs to be spoken clearly. This was not private, secret meetings. Mayor Burton had nothing to do with any of this deliberation. He was not involved with anything. Just the mere fact that he leaves the room and walks out and sits out there for a couple of hours is a very public show of what that means. But behind that is the absolute fact that he never, ever participated in any of the conversations. And I want that to be very clear as well. And if anybody has any other allegation to the contrary, I would like to hear it, and I would like to see the proof of it too. I'm really getting tired of the rumors that have been flying around this town. But there's one other thing that you're kind of missing here tonight, Madge, is the fact that if you're concerned that the public didn't have enough input into this issue and you wanted to bring it up tonight to make more of an input, I don't see a whole lot of the public here. So in fact, there's a lot fewer people here tonight than there were here at the last meeting, which means that the public is not going to have any more of an opportunity to weigh in on this thing than they've had for the last year. So I don't see what the purpose of this whole thing is. Plus, I believe there was something that Mr. Lance mentioned the last time about the resolution. That we took a vote and the resolution, maybe you should say it.
I just cited at the last meeting this Rule of Procedure 16F that says that when there's a public hearing and the council takes action on it and determines that it's going to enter into a resolution subsequently, that the action is considered final when that resolution is signed, but that the public hearing is closed and there's no more public debate on the merits of the issue. And that it's appropriate to have the matter on a consent calendar. So the public has the right to say whatever they wish, basically, at public comment time on the agenda. They can address this, they can address the action that was taken on May 11th, or any other aspect of this during public comment, but this consent calendar item is simply for ratification of the action that was already taken. And it's necessary because one of the things that the trust required, this letter from Phil Hunsucker had this big block of language describing exactly what they insisted be part of a written acknowledgement that the buildings will remain and so forth. And so we quoted that language and inserted it into the resolution so the trust would be satisfied and that we've taken the action that's required.
So I'd be willing to make that motion.
Well, before we do that, would it be appropriate in this action to have public comment? tonight?
It certainly would be. We do have a local procedural rule that says that it's not required, but there's already been lots of criticism that the public didn't have an opportunity well enough. So I think it would be prudent for you to allow public comment on it.
I agree. Did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just going to reference the public hearing being closed at the last meeting.
Yeah.
But this
well,
isn't a-
mitigating circumstances, so is there anybody in the public who wishes to comment? Step up and watch the light. Remember, 3 minutes, and when the red light goes on, the floor opens up and you disappear. That was a joke, in case anybody is not up to jokes.
My name is David Drell. I wasn't here on the 11th, but I read about it in the paper and from other sources. I think there's a good likelihood that all of the REMCO-related meetings that have occurred since the decision by the judge and the litigation was ended, all of those closed session meetings were done in violation of the Brown Act. The Brown Act does not allow continued meetings in private, in secret, when litigation is over. And just because there was litigation doesn't mean that every discussion and update having to do with the result, the behavior of the trust, should occur in closed session. And Ellen might have something to say about that as well. But I just want to reference your closed session notice that I think is kind of a boilerplate. Conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, people of State of California versus City of Willits and Remco Hydraulics. That's the notice for September 9th of last year. There is no existing litigation. The litigation is over. And all you received there and you received at that meeting information that should have been made public about the progress of Mr. Pinoli's behavior versus Burton Mitchell. In addition to that, your agenda item on May 11th, which says presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve a proposed plan to use and develop the former Remco site. So, in my opinion, that's unnecessarily vague. The Brown Act doesn't allow that kind of vagueness. In fact, there have been case laws showing when vague discussions, you knew it was just Burton Mitchell. You knew secretly, based on your closed session meetings, that it was Burton Mitchell and Pinoli was out. But the public didn't know that because you got that information in closed session. What you should have said is presentation, discussion, and possible action to approve a proposed plan by Burton Mitchell to use and develop the former Remco site. That would have given the public real hard information about what you guys were going to do. And that's why the public came on the 11th and thought Pinoli was still in contention. You knew he wasn't, but the public didn't, because you discussed it and you learned about it in closed session inappropriately. And I think in the future, it would behoove the City Council to comply with the Brown Act properly and not be so quick to go into closed session, and to have agenda item descriptions that are accurate and clear.
Thank you, David. Anybody else? Ellen? Go ahead. Keep it a family affair.
Family that protests together stays together.
There you go, exactly.
I hope. My name is Ellen Drell, and I just underscore my feelings about the possible Brown Act violations are the same as David's, and I would say maybe a litmus test is if you came to the meeting on May 11th knowing things that the public was not able to know either through the media or through coming to public meetings like this, then then it's very likely that the Brown Act was violated and that you had special information that the public didn't have. And I agree with Larry that the city's only question on this issue is whether or not some proposal, whether it be Pinoli's or Burton Mitchell or whoever, was acceptable to the city. And that's not existing litigation. So I don't think any meetings that discussed any aspect of that ever should have been in closed session. Those discussions should have been open to the public. So if you came to the meeting on May 11th knowing something that the public didn't know, I would say that there was probably a violation of the Brown Act. And that's my main concern. I have no particular preference as to what development would be the most appropriate at that site. It may be at Burton Mitchell, it may be Pinoli, it may be something else. But my concern is that the citizens of this community who have put so much effort into planning for this community for years and months with good heart and open heart and come to charrettes and discussions and shared their views with you on the street and here in city council, not be kept in the dark on something that is so important as probably the most significant development potential plan being offered for the city of Willits. Like I say, if you knew something more about what had gone on with the word than the public knew on May 11th, then you probably very likely violated the Brown Act. So I think it would be great if you made a point of gathering together all that information that was discussed in those closed sessions and discuss them openly at a regular meeting of the city council. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Your turn.
My name is Tom Fristow. You know, we just completed a week-long series of workshops on what the vision for this town is. And, you know, there was a lot of enthusiasm, and a lot of people came to the last meeting expecting to have a discussion, you know, to see a possibility of something good in the eyes of many of us, the skunk train. What did we discuss in these workshops? I wasn't there for the majority of them. I have the store to open. But transportation, economic development, what we want the image of our town to be. Now, one of the things this town is known for is the skunk train. We have, Frontier Days, we have the Carnival. These happen once a year. The skunk train goes on. It would be nice if people could come and the first thing you get to the town, you have the skunk train right there. Many of us came expecting that, and we were sort of blindsided by the whole thing. It felt to me out of the blue, you know, and to hear now that there's going to be possibly a brew pub and maybe even a mini industrial mall there or something like that just doesn't feel right. Another thing that doesn't feel right to me is, in spite of the fact that Mr. Burton recused himself from the meeting, and as you say, absented himself from other meetings, this doesn't seem like open meetings. The public should be a part of this. And that's what the Brown Act is all about. Have public input, public knowledge of what is going on. And a thing that's doesn't sit well with me, and I suspect it doesn't sit well with other people, is $200,000. You can't buy a house in this town for $200,000. It just doesn't feel right. Now, it looked to me like, you know, some on the city council might have been somewhat blindsided to this whole thing too, hearing about the letter showing up on the same day. Then Mr. Ornstein's told us that there have been meetings going on for a year that we didn't know anything about. Why didn't the public come to this meeting knowing that the skunk train was not part of the picture? Let me just say it one more time. You can't buy a house in this town for $200,000. And I ask that the people who voted for that revisit their decision and let's look at it again. As I understand it, those who voted for it can vote to revisit it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the public?
My name is Bill Barksdale. I understand that this is a sale between a private buyer and a private seller. It's my understanding. If that's correct. Is that correct, Mr. Lance?
Between the trust and a private party.
Trust is a private party, correct? Not a public?
It's not a governmental agency.
Okay. So, there's very little that can be done about that. So I think that the main issue here, and Ron, I want to say this to you because you've been very pejorative and kind of scolding to people. I think the public was kind of blindsided. There's a lot of private session stuff that seems to go on with the city council, and it may be proper, but it's the appearance of impropriety that oftentimes is the issue. And you're a public agency. You serve the public. You don't serve just yourselves and your own opinions. You are elected to represent the public, and the appearance of impropriety is an issue. It's always an issue with government, and so my caution is that the city council pay more attention to private session types of issues and that sort of thing. And what appears to possibly be improper may be. So err on the side of caution.
Okay, thank you, Bill. Anybody else? Okay.
Oh,
So I'd be happy to
My name is Linda Posner, and oftentimes the city council will say, look, you have the opportunity, look, we're half empty, we're mostly empty. Well, to tell you the truth, much like with goings-on in our government, which I've heard many of you wonderfully say, this doesn't feel right, and I don't feel that I know. I think a lot of people, like myself sometimes, don't come here because I often don't feel that I really have a say. I've heard you at the city council say before, I would never do this, and I. Well, we elected you, and I want to know who you represent. I wonder if you asked yourselves enough times, who do I represent? I know you all are very bright and very articulate and do a lot of studying these issues. I also know that you have very strong personalities. And I've been to enough meetings here to know that oftentimes there's a real jaw tightening and I see a frown and I see, I would never do this. And it's not about what you would do. It's about what the people you represent want. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Anybody else?
So-
Okay, bring it up.
I would be happy to make a motion ratifying the resolution taken by the City Council on May 11th, approving the request of the Willits Environmental Remediation Trust to sell the former Remco hydraulics facility and surrounding properties to the Ed Mitchell Group. And I don't know if I have a second. Sorry.
Yeah, let's get a second first. Do we have a second?
Yes.
All right, Larry seconded.
I just wanted to comment and respond to some of the concerns that have been brought up. I represent the residents of the city of Willits, and I am absolutely confident that we did everything by the book in our closed sessions. And because they're closed sessions, there are certain things that we can't talk about publicly, but I'm sure that there is a way that we could detail what we can for the past meetings. I think when Councilmember Ornstein mentions, the many meetings that we've had on this, most of those were public meetings. I just want to say, I think that that's being taken out of context. Not just in July when we had both proposals come and discuss both proposals at the city council, and people could ask questions about what they wanted to see there, but also besides that meeting, there was meetings where we were discussing the cleanup on the Remco site and how it's progressing and what is happening with that. So I really do not believe that was done in the dark or with any ill will. I too have serious issues with how much the trust chose to charge, and I don't believe your $200,000 is correct, but it is really low. And when I question them about that, like whether or not they did any sort of promotion or widely advertising the property, they said that they hadn't, because I get the impression that they're not in the business of making money. They felt like they wanted to get this property off their books, and once it was cleaned up enough to do so, and this is, I can't speak for them, but that's the sense that I got for them, that because the property has a stigma based on the fact that it is a toxic property, and that is known, that I don't know if they thought that they could get lots more than that, but I also, when Ms. Farr was here publicly last time, she said that they didn't really put it out to bid in a broad sense. As I mentioned before, I support the skunk train. I really would like to see them somewhere on this property, because I think that it could be an asset to the proposal that is being put forward. I hope that can work out, but I mean that involves personalities that are not just ours, and it involves potential litigation that doesn't involve the city necessarily directly, but the trust has said that they're not currently interested in selling to the skunk train property for other reasons than ours. But for all of this, that is why I am willing to move our resolution forward.
Yeah, I'm not going to speak to all of the sessions that had to do with Remco for the last however many years since the litigation. But since July 22nd, I don't believe there has been a single public meeting about it until 2 weeks ago. And there were numerous closed sessions, some of which had to do with the potential land use and some of which didn't. But some of the information that came out in that, and we're not allowed to talk about it, but some of it would have been very helpful for the public to know. And in fact, might have alleviated this feeling that this thing just went, on May 10th, here was a staff report, and May 11th we vote, and May 25th we ratify the vote because you're not even going to discuss it anymore. To me, the appearance, at least, is hasty and not very conducive to listening to the public and making a decision that reflects the public. And the appearance is very important. So I think, and some of the things that came out in closed session, I think had they been discussed in open session, we might have gotten more information. I don't know, but I got more information in the last 2 weeks after our May 11th vote and some accurate and inaccuracies about what I learned in closed session. And I'm not, so I don't think, I'm not questioning whether we're making a proper decision. I agree that Bruce Burton has recused himself properly, that the city has very limited authority on discretion on this matter. All of that I agree with. I don't think we're making an improper or illegal decision. But I do think we made it in a manner that appears very hasty and did not encourage and give proper time for the public to have the information available to them. So with that said, I think we go ahead with our vote, but I'm not real happy.
Okay. I just want to, good, Larry.
If those of you that were at the meeting last time, 2 weeks ago, I asked Ann Farr, which was the head of the trust, to come up in front, and I said, would it make any difference if we postpone this for 2 weeks? And her answer to me, and I won't quote it exactly because I don't remember it exactly, was that they have a contract with Mitchell, and it's not going to make any difference whether we do it for we postpone it for 2 weeks or for a month. It doesn't make any difference. The contract between a private individual and another private individual is already been set. And so, I don't understand, I understand that you people are upset, and believe me, if you have your business on Main Street, you understand that the people were upset. I mean, I had them lined up, I wish they'd have been buying jewelry instead of talking to me. But I have to go back to my statement. It's two entities, that one selling and one buying, and whatever the price was, yeah, it was a really good price. I understand that, but I didn't set the price. And I didn't say, gee, that's really low, you should jack it up or whatever. I only had the one thing that I had mentioned for 6 months. And thank you, that's it. Ron, I'm done.
And I think it's important to point out, tagging on to Larry's comment, is that the price was the price that was not only offered to the Mitchell Group, but also to the Skunk Train. So it's not like anybody was playing favorites. That's what the price was. And it could have been handled differently, perhaps. That was their choice. They're not in the real estate business. They just want to, they came in to clean up the property, to do something that the city wanted to happen. And they did that. And then, once it's cleaned up, they were fully aware of the desire of the city to get that back into a productive state again. It's been empty for 20 years, and the city wanted that property to be useful again. But there's one other thing that everybody seems to be missing, and I guess because I'm pugnacious and, you know, I have this attitude that people have assigned to me, I suppose. But the fact is, the Skunk Train isn't going anywhere. In fact, on May 11th, I specifically asked Robert Pinoli if the Skunk Train, if he doesn't get the Remco property, is the Skunk Train going to leave? Well, he didn't answer that question, but I certainly hope he's not. So the point is, the Skunk Train has been operating from this location for like 100 years. And from all reports from the Skunk Train itself, they're doing very well, and their ridership has increased, operating out of the Commercial Street Depot. So the fact that they don't get to buy the Remco property doesn't mean that their presence in town is going to be diminished unless they decide that they want to move away or something. And I do know personally, they had said it, that the Mitchell Group is offering a visible spot for the Skunk Train to have a depot right there on Main Street. In fact, it was on their plan. It showed a platform, it showed signs. So the Skunk Train will have the visibility on Main Street that they wanted. So nobody's going to lose anything. We have a motion and a second. I'm going to ask any more comments. Okay, let's take the vote, please.
Councilmember
Yes.
Strong?
No.
Madrigal? Yes. Weinstein?
Yes. Thank you. We may retrieve our mayor, and you're leaving. Right. Okay, thank you for sticking around.
Wow. And Bruce will come back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wore a jacket. It's cold out there.
Okay, she's all yours. You got it.
Thank you. So we're up to public communication, is that correct?
Public matter. Yeah, public communication, right.
Anybody under public communications, items not on the agenda, no action will be taken? Second, third, and last call. So we'll move on to a notice of a public hearing for the discussion of possible adoption of a resolution approving changes to certain fees and charges. This is a two-step process. It's an introduction tonight and then one more time, right? Emily?
No, we adopt the resolution this evening, and then it would go into effect July 1st.
Okay. So I went through it. There's sort of minimal changes, administrative cost changes is all I saw. Did I miss something?
Can
Oh,
I just
good.
add one more thing?
Thank you.
So you made a few changes to the airport.
charges, and mostly they were a 10% increase. But what is missing in the rates and fees, and I would like to add, is that if we can get the rentals prepaid for a year, then we give a 10% discount. And if they'll prepay for 6 months, then we'll give a 5% discount to kind of offset the costs there, and yet still keep the rates pretty parallel with some of the other
Okay.
local.
I have
You have a comment?
Yeah, I have actually a clarification here. I was surprised to read this, maybe because I'm not informed, maybe I missed a meeting or something, but the Bechtel Grove Gym, when did that cease to be a city facility?
That's an error. It is our facility. However, we don't handle
Okay.
any
Fees.
usage, reservations, rentals of it.
Okay, got that. And then the truck fill station, is that opened again?
They moved it. They were in the
it?
process of
It's
moving
been
it.
moved.
And it's hooked up to the Parkwell pump now.
Right.
Oh, okay, good.
So we'll be starting that.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Bruce?
Yeah.
I have a little trouble with the general increase in the engineering design work by the engineer, and the other one behind it, which is the engineering increase for reviewing the plans of up $25. I think that for somebody coming in, that the fees are high enough, and I think they should remain the way they are. But that's just my thing on that. And one other thing, someplace in here. The sewer fund. The deposit facility, have we completely completed that, where the haulers haul the waste from out of the city limits to there to dispose of it? Have we done that the whole thing?
The septage?
Yes.
Receiving? I don't believe, we have not built the septage receiving station yet.
It's not done yet, it's close.
Is that what you're asking, Larry?
Final plumbing.
So it's still by eye type of thing, or on their honor kind of a thing instead of?
They just write down the,
Okay. Thank you.
We're working towards it.
Okay, thank you.
More. Well, this time I'd like to, I might have failed to do that. This is a public hearing, open the public hearing. We're going to continue to have a discussion here, but if anybody in the public has comment on these changes of fees, I'd like to suggest one. I don't know that it would, I don't know that it will bring much of a response, but I'd like to have us consider dropping the tiered water usage charges. We have lots of water this year, and I see people trying to reestablish some vegetation in their yards, and I think we raised our water rates and we lost revenue. And I think that it's, when we have water, I think we should, we're in the business, my perspective, we're in the business of trying to sell it. And so we got late rains this year, we got full deal. I'd be in favor of dropping the tiered system. Yes, Larry?
You want to drop all of it and go back to what?
Just the base rate on the tier 1 rate for all, I mean, the way it used to be, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you were charged by the unit at, whether you used one unit or, so right now tier 1 is 0 to 300 cubic feet is charged at $3.78 per 100 cubic feet. Right, Rod?
378 and then 696 for two,
Yeah, and
tier
then,
two, and then
tier 3 jumps to $9, so it triples. But what we've seen is people don't use water, and our revenues have gone down. Madge?
If we're going to consider that, I would really like to pull it off of this action and have it be a separate agendized item, because I think a lot of people do really care about that. Both, pro and con, or whatever, across the gamut, but I'd also like to see a little bit of an analysis of what that would do to our average revenues if we got rid of the tiered system. But I would like to see that we're not encouraging people that are really overusing the water, but I like the idea of people being able to do their landscaping within reason. There are people who really abuse the water system and, don't correct leaks or whatever it is, where they're really out there. And so if we're going to reconsider that, I would really like to see a little bit more analysis and have it come back as a agendized item so people can participate.
Yeah, I agree with Madge that if we were to do something like that, it would be best to do it with a little more information. I mean, intuitively, I would be opposed to dropping the tier rate for, again, because of Madge's reasons that, even though we are in pretty good shape with our water right now, as we've learned, you never know. And I just never think it's a good idea to squander whatever we have, even whenever we have a lot. It's just not, smart. Now, maybe we can adjust the rates downward slightly to make it a little more user-friendly, perhaps. But that would come in with a full-blown discussion, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have a more complete discussion of it. I just feel that what we wear two hats in this job here, and one is to be the water conservation specialist of the town, but the other is to try and keep water rates
Covering the expenses.
Yeah, and this last go round, we found that people can be very good at conserving water, and you end up chasing your tail. You just continue to chase it, and we spent a lot of money. We spent a lot of their money to address the efficiency at the plant, to get more water from the plant to town, and we've obviously spent $1.5 million of their money building a backup system, so we have a different supply of water to in case of emergencies. And I think it's part of our civic expectation of our homeowners to take care of their yards and plant gardens and have, I kind of understand the concern about people using too much water, but they're going to pay. They pay for it. There's not that they get free water. If they use it, it costs, and we need the money. So if one guy uses 100 units and the guy next unit uses 10, the equity is that the guy pays for the 100 units. And but in this tiered system, I'm concerned that we are forcing everybody down to try and use 10 units, and we cannot generate the revenue. We've hit that plateau where we've hit revenue. We've made the cost to the level where people don't want to buy our product, and ultimately they need to buy our product. So we fill that, we fill our reservoirs up every year, and as a business person, your hope would be that you sell every gallon of that thing the day before it started to rain, and then you'd fill it up again, and you'd sell that, you know, I mean, that's what you know, and I think that a big part of the community expects us to look at it that way, not as to try and make sure that the reservoir's full in November, so. But I don't know what the, you know, with this rate, this is a rate hearing night, sets rates for the coming year, agendizing this for a future meeting. I don't know what that entails in terms of amending water rates mid-season. I guess we can do that as well as anything, right? I mean,
We can schedule another public hearing just for that.
These would.
I mean, I'm fine with that. This is the first time it's come up. Usually this comes up, we address it some in the budget hearing process, and we did not have those, you know, not the budget, but the work sessions and things like that, so.
We may also need to do a 218 study if we're going to change.
I don't know that we do 218 to lower rates. I certainly have to do them to raise rates. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I
just might
think,
consider a compromise.
Well, yeah, I could.
With tier, but maybe increase your lowest tier, that might be the result of a 218 process.
I mean, I'd be interested in any idea, whether it's to cap it at tier 2, you know, raise tier 1 to 10 units and make tier 2 10 and above, you know, something. I'm just interested in maybe trying to improve the income line to our water department. And oftentimes, lowering prices sometimes raises the amount of money you make, not just raising prices, which government tends to mostly do.
Yeah. I just wanted to comment that the non-residential quantity charge is basically just a flat $7.20. And I wonder if that's sort of what it costs us to actually produce the water on average over the course of the year. And if so, I wouldn't want to have our entire residential structure at the low level, you know, 378, because then we would really be losing money every time we sold a gallon of water. We should be covering our costs, and so that's why I think it needs a little more analysis to see that.
Well, I'm happy to defer that to a line item, an agenda item at a future meeting.
And this was going to become effective July 1st, so if we meet at our first meeting of June, we could still do that?
I don't know. We have a lot on we've got the whole budget approval process ahead of us here in the next two meetings.
Then should we include this as it is for now until we've had a chance to revisit it?
I think that would be best.
Well, I don't know that you probably have any choice. I may not support the rate hearing deal, but that probably is the only way to go forward. You got to have some rate. You can't.
Yeah, right.
You can't have no water rate. So.
Okay.
But do we have any other comments up here on the rate adjustment? Do we have, Larry, you'd like to make a motion relative to your suggestion?
Make the motion that we table the water usage charge for this meeting and bring it back at a later meeting and check about the rates.
Well, wouldn't you say that you want to just to continue the present rate structure and look at it? We've got to have a rate.
Well, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that as long as we're discussing it, and we're only going to discuss it, it's something next week, next 2 weeks, is there something more urgent than water for people that are trying to grow a garden and some of these things?
Well, if we can fit it in, I'm just concerned that we have the whole budget to discuss, and we got 2 meetings to do. I'm happy to try it. That's fine. I was really actually addressing more thinking you might want to make a motion about the fees relative to your engineering costs instead of raising the $25.
Well, I think
see if that flies.
I think we ought to talk about that too. Just to see it on here that it's raised the amount of money it is, I want to know what they're going to do for the extra money that they haven't done before.
Well, I guess I could only surmise that they're thinking that that is more appropriate to what their costs are to do that work in this environment. But, you know, is there any idea what that does to the engineering department income line to raise that $25? Rod, could you? Does that amount to?
We're considering the future, and no, I don't remember the last time that was actually charged.
Hasn't been charged this year.
You haven't ever even charged $125?
Not this year.
Not that, you haven't had any work that's
Because it
has
says,
generated those charges.
says that it raised it by $25 to $150, so it had to be at $125,
There just
raise
hasn't-
it 25.
There
That's
hasn't
right.
been any usage of that service.
There's been no usage.
So it'd have zero impact if it had no use. You could have it $500 an hour or $5 an hour times zero. It still is.
Still zero.
Still zero.
I'll move approval of the staff recommendation, including the water fees, because I think, given the amount of staff work to go into the budget hearings, it might be really hard to get a really good analysis in the next 2 weeks of the water rate changes. But I do think that should be early on in our earliest opportunity that we should revisit that. But in the meantime, I'd like to move that we accept the staff report, the staff recommendation on all of the fees.
All except the water?
Well, no, I'm going to, on an interim basis, we have to have something in there, and I'd rather continue what we have now than try to solve it tonight or expect Susie to come up with something in 2 weeks, given all the other workload that she's got in 2 weeks. And we do have to have it before July 1st. We have to have something. So I'd rather keep what we have now in place as recommended and then urge that we revisit it soon. Is that
So,
reasonable?
yeah, just to clarify, recommended action, which includes the existing water rates, we're not proposing any changes to them. And at the earliest opportunity, sometime in the next month, we're going to bring water rates back for discussion for possible revision.
Right. And because this becomes effective July 1st and you have to notify people, it might be that the first couple of months in the new fiscal year continue what we've got now.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see a reasonable alternative except to try to shoot from the hip and decide something tonight.
I can say that, but I can hard time imagining if we lower the water rates that will fill this room up with people complaining.
Well, I'm not prepared to figure out how we're going to lower them without some more information.
So we're going to leave everything as it is, but we're going to revisit it,
Yes,
the water rates.
that's my motion.
But nothing with the engineering.
No, it's staff recommendation. It would bump those by $25. She's
Okay, thank you. That's all I need to know.
And also the airport discount fees that are not.
Right.
Oh,
Yes.
yes, I'm sorry, yeah, including that revision that Susie presented, if you pay by the year or the 6 months, you get a discount.
5% for 6.
Well, that was complicated.
So,
Can we hear, we don't have a.
The motion is the
Not yet.
staff report, including the revision that Susie brought to us, which would be a discount of 10% if the airport people pay by the year or in advance for the year, and 5% if they pay 6 months in advance. So that's the staff recommendation. I move approval of that. And I included in that is that we revisit the water rates as soon as staff can practically get around to doing that, hopefully very soon, and that would then become effective after proper notice and all that.
is there a second on that?
I'll second.
We have a motion, a second. Any other public comment on this rate hearing?
I'd like to make a comment about the water rate discussion, if I may.
Yeah, that's what I asked. Step forward.
Bill Barksdale. I disagree that the city is in the business of selling water. I think you're in the business of managing the water supply properly. And I think that there's good evidence that the aquifer has not been replenished yet from years of drought. And although I can appreciate what you're saying, Mayor Burton, that you want to do something to stimulate more revenue, I don't know that in this time when we're still uncertain as to what the weather pattern is going to be, as to whether we're going to have an abundance of water as we do this year or not, it's premature to start discouraging people from being water conscious. And I don't know that there's any proof that with the way people have changed their water use patterns, if lowering the water rates is going to encourage people to use more water. So I just wanted to make that comment. I agree that I think it needs more study rather than just tonight suddenly for us to be thinking about lowering the water rates, perhaps eliminating Tier 1 and having Tier 1 be the Tier 2 charge might be more appropriate, and that certainly would increase revenue, but just my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, there is a motion and a second to essentially approve the water rate, the whole rate study is presented with the added discount for yearly payment of airport rental fees and a future agenda item to look at a water rate analysis. So we have a roll call vote, please.
Yes. Councilmember Stransky?
No.
Strong?
Yes.
Weinstein?
Yeah.
Mayor Burton?
I really want to vote no, but I'm going to vote yes because I'm going to address this at the appropriate time. Just get it through. And I don't know where we'd go if we stuck at 2-2. We'd be here for another 2 hours trying to figure out where we're going to go. I'm happy to defer it to the more time when we can give it a more thorough discussion. Did you do the rest of the consent calendar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Then, looks to me like we will move along. We have the right to appeal. You can read 1094.6 of the Code of Civil Procedure if you wish to appeal decisions by the City Council. And let's move along to City Manager reports. And let's talk about the discussion and direction regarding preliminary Main Street improvement plans related to Caltrans relinquishment project.
Thank you. So tonight I wanted to just start the discussion regarding the city's desired Main Street improvement design concepts that need to be submitted to Caltrans to incorporate into their relinquishment project. We've been meeting with our design team and project team has been meeting with Caltrans on a regular basis for the last several months. And at a point in time, we agreed that the end of May would be when we would submit our desired plans to them. And so that's WRT, our design consultant, is prepared to do that either early next week or possibly as early as this Friday. However, I just today got what I handed out tonight. We had a project team conference call yesterday morning, and we talked about a meeting that city staff and the design consultants attended last week in Sacramento with Caltrans to, get down to these nuts and bolts. Shared a lot of ideas about how we could streamline this, that, or the other. One idea that came forward is when Caltrans was discussing some challenges they were having with some grades, they asked if our city engineering staff could help with some of the designs of the intersections. And so that looks like that's a doable thing from our end. And it could be a trade-off for getting something else included by Caltrans. So those discussions are continuing. It was sort of this dance of, they're wanting us to show our hand and we want them to show their hand. And but I think we are all really trying to get to a point where we tell them this is what we want included and this is how much money that the city is willing to contribute to that end, and then see where that lands. It's been concurred by all parties that whatever they receive, either early next week or this Friday, which you guys might decide to direct staff to delay by a week tonight, are going to be preliminary plans, and over the next couple of months, those are going to be fine-tuned as they start trying to incorporate them into their relinquishment project. So what you have in your packet tonight is a draft technical memorandum prepared by GHD, and that lays out the framework for the cost estimates. You have an illustration that was visible last Thursday afternoon at the Living Preview out here on East Commercial Street. 4 pages of the GHD's opinion of probable construction costs. Those have been divided into 4 zones, and so I want to walk you through those a little bit. And then a summary of the public comments from last Thursday's sneak preview. So if you flip to the first page of the cost estimates, as I said, there are 4 pages. They've divided these into 4 zones, and so the north zone, page 1, is commercial to the northern project limits near State Street. Would just be south of the Sherwood, where they're going to do the Sherwood Road intersection project. Page 2 is Zone B, the downtown core, and that's from commercial to Wood Street.
Is that north, I'm sorry, does it not include the high school?
It does. Their relinquishment project will go all the way to Castile.
To the city limits.
Right.
Yeah.
But for the purposes of sort of the priority area, they focused in on these 4 zones. Okay. Page 3 is Zone C, that's the downtown core south, Wood to Valley Street. And page 4 would be the south zone, and that's from Valley to Highway 20. On each of those pages, you'll notice 3 columns with cost estimates. The first one is the base project, and that represents the work that Caltrans will be doing as part of the relinquishment project. The second column is the Main Street additions, and those are things that through this planning process, these things have emerged as things that the community and the city would like to see added to that relinquishment project. And so for those items, we'll continue to try and negotiate with Caltrans to get whatever we can included in theirs. And again, going back to some of these trade-offs that we've been talking about, but also things that we would identify funding sources that we could contribute, and that would take the form of a cooperative agreement. We would also discuss phasing, and so there are some things that it makes sense that we would want to have Caltrans do in their project because it's going to be underground work, and other things such as public art and seating that could be done later. And then column 3 are options, and these are things that represent either an addition in cost or a decrease in cost. So for example, about 2/3 down on the page, let's see, there is
On the A section?
right, minor concrete work. I was actually looking for the section that had an option for temporary watering bags. So under irrigation, this is about halfway down on the page.
Between 22 and 23.
Right. The cost estimate in the ad column has $20,000 for irrigation just in this one zone. And that is for automated irrigation. We could trim that cost if we did hand watering as an initial measure. It's not something that I would recommend. I don't think city staff would recommend that because I think there's a risk of things not getting watered properly and then we lose what we planted. But that's just an example of something, a cost that could potentially be shaved.
But that all shows up under the base project, or it doesn't show up at all. I'm just having trouble figuring out, you have the 20,000.
Well, the irrigation is under ag.
Yeah, it's under Main Street ad,
Right.
but the option of temporary water instead isn't shown in the options.
It did go away, because that was in a previous version of this. We talked about the temporary irrigation measures
Being an option,
versus the automated.
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Just didn't make it into the text.
Okay,
It's not an important point on that, it's just I'm
Right.
trying to read it, to
Right.
figure out the chart and
My
make sure
apologies.
I can understand it.
So why this is broken into 4 zones is to give maximum flexibility to prioritize, whether it be zones. So for example, the downtown core from commercial to valley might be considered the top priority. And maybe some of, the north zone and the southern zone aren't at the same priority level, but there might be some components in each of those that we would want to pull out and say, this component is really important to us. So it's designed to give you flexibility in prioritizing. In addition to that, like I said, we would need to identify funding sources, and the 2 primary funding sources that we have would be the half-cent sales tax and our D1 funds. And half-cent sales tax is about $900,000 a year.
Yeah,
Is it still that high even with the price of gasoline down?
last year it was,
It's a half cent on top of whatever the price of gasoline is, so that shouldn't, isn't it? It's not a percentage of what you're paying for gas, it's a half cent on top.
Yeah.
So that should be relatively constant, except some people aren't buying as much
No,
gas.
no, this
half
is sales
It's
tax.
a half
Oh,
a
sales.
percent.
Yeah, that's what the nine.
Okay,
It's
oh,
half
I'm
of a
sorry.
percent,
Okay,
not
gotcha.
half
The
a
gas
It's the
tax
sales
is per
taxes
gallon.
on, okay, good. I'm
It's a
sorry.
different
I'm wrong.
fund.
Take that back.
And then our D1 funds, I believe we have about $227,000 in there. So those are 2 of our city funding sources that we have to potentially throw at this. Let's see.
Are there any potential grants, funds anywhere?
Well, there are always grant opportunities. I think the problem there is going to be timing. The grant cycles, applying for the grant, waiting to hear back, and then when the funding would be available. So that seems to be the most challenging option. The other option would be some long-term financing options. And I think at the next council meeting, I'm going to have a representative here to talk about performance contracts and how that works with coming up with some energy conservation projects to retrofit, whether it's interior lighting or solar or street lights. And with the cost savings that we would achieve, that would cover whatever payment we would have, and you can do long-term financing. It's similar to what we looked at before.
Excuse me, I'm looking at the contingency as a line item,
Mm-hmm.
and I see 35%. That's, as I recall, it's a little bit higher than normally scheduled for contingency. Is there a reason that we have to
The
go
reasoning
high?
is to be very conservative with these numbers and budget high, so that if we don't have to come back, or Caltrans doesn't have to go back to their decision makers and request more money.
Okay, so right now, the way it sits is we have a number from Caltrans of the amount of money that they're willing to put into this, but we're still negotiating with them with how much we would be willing to put in. Is that correct?
That's correct, but we're also negotiating with them with some parts of the project that we may design in-house and provide to them, and as a trade-off for doing that, we would get something in return that isn't currently in their plan.
All right, so we'll have a chance between now and, I guess, the next council meeting to review this stuff and really get into it, but then we'll get into it at the next meeting specifically and be able to make hopefully some decisions, is that?
That's correct. That's my request for you tonight.
Okay.
We made a decision to not have Allison Purnell here tonight, given that this would have to be kicked over to the next meeting. So she's planning to attend that meeting.
Good.
Also on column 1, the base project, this is GHG's estimate of what the cost will be for Caltrans to do their project. And it is significantly different than what Caltrans has budgeted. They have 3.4 million, and I think this number came out at just under 5.3 million for the relinquishment project.
Not including north of the Sherwood.
What did Caltrans say, I mean, when you showed them some of these things, because I see that, you know, one of the things that we talked about quite a bit with them was in their estimates, they were using asphalt at $70 a ton. I see it down here at 115. Are they?
They're sticking with their numbers so far.
We didn't show them the estimate, I don't know.
No, they have not seen this.
Oh, they have not seen the estimates.
Didn't want
I just think if we do anything, we ought to buy some of that $70 asphalt.
to point out that.
No, I mean simply that, you know, they're talking, I got you a second there. I mean, in my discussions with them, they're talking about that 2/10 cover on Main Street, which Rod has said is totally inadequate. It's a 7 to 10 year lifespan. It really needs to be 5 or 6 tenths or whatever, 5 inches.
4 or 5 inches, yeah.
And it seems to me that that's the one place where we would have be money well spent. Tell them we'll buy the extra 5,000 tons or whatever that is at $70, and have them put 6 inches asphalt on Main Street. I mean, that is the only place I see so far here where you can kind of use their numbers to your advantage, you know. But when do we want to talk about the actual streetscape and our input or suggestions relative to I mean, it's a really difficult, it's a very small picture here that you're looking at. But, I mean, and I'm not sure that I understand at this level exactly what is occurring in the old downtown. I do see the East Valley, the Valley Street and East Valley intersection, post office intersection, and I'm concerned about that median there, prohibiting a left turn off of Valley Street onto Main Street.
Yeah.
And I saw that was noted in some comments
Yes.
in the deal there. I mean, part of it is that, I mean, we have limited access to Main Street. From there, you go all the way down to Highway 20 from the west side of town, and north of there, the next intersection is a one-way westbound only. You have to go all the way up to West Mendocino before you can get to Main Street again. I'm just looking at traffic circulation for that western side of town, and if they wanted to go north or even go to the post office, they're going to have to go either to the northern stoplight or the Highway 20 stoplight at this point, or walk, I guess. Larry, you had your hand up when I got off my phone.
My thing is the watering, and I have mentioned it to everybody that will listen to me. The watering if you're going to do bulb outs and you're going to plant trees and you're going to plant shrubs and stuff, you can't go with volunteers or people donating their time. It has to go in the ground and underneath the concrete and underneath wherever the asphalt or whatever when we first do it. And that's been one of the problems that we've had in this city for years and years and years. And they've wrestled with that for all the years that I can remember. I really think that we really need to go at it right and put it underneath the concrete or underneath the asphalt and then stub it for whenever we do whatever we're going to do at an intersection, but have the water there ready to go, so all we have to do is just tie into it. But the water supply all the way down from State Street all the way down to Highway 20 or whatever we decide to do. but it needs to be in the ground now before they pave over it and do all the things they need to do so that it's there.
Is there any,
No matter what
is
it
there
costs.
any in this, I don't know the answer to this, is there any irrigation water in Main Street or in
No, I don't
the
think so.
sidewalk now?
No.
Those trees that are living on Main Street are doing it?
Yeah, and that's the reason that they're coming up in the concrete is because they're looking for water. If they had water that would go down, the roots would follow the roots down. And then you wouldn't have the popping up of the asphalt. Plus, if you had larger, I noticed that when they did Humboldt, that they made a larger area out of bricks so that, you know, it wasn't popping the concrete, it was
Right.
moving the brick, and which was really a good idea, Rod. But I really think the water is something that we really need to do. And because that will be around for generations and generations. And it's going to be.
Rod, how would mechanically, I mean, obviously, what water main in Main Street right now? Would you, each block, would you have to tap into that and then put a lateral out to do a block at a time, one on the west and one on the east? Is that kind of the way you would do it, or how?
Yeah, you could go that way, you might be able to combine blocks, and if you can cross the intersections easily, there's potential where we may have raised intersections where we have the water, like you said, and you just come off with some smaller PVC pipe, and they're going to tear up all the sidewalks, so it's the right time to do it.
When they pave, are they doing the aprons back into Wood Street 10 feet, or, I mean, does it kind of?
I think to the edge. I haven't seen their temporary construction easements if they go beyond the right of way, the existing right of way.
Which would be back of the sidewalk?
Yes.
So but they're not gonna just cut it off at the curb and pave just to the curb?
Not that I'm aware of. We haven't seen anything since the plans we got in February.
Is what Larry's asking for reflected at all in the cost estimates at this point?
I think it's that $20,000 that represents just that one section.
Just that one
Right,
section.
yeah, and then there's probably one for each section, yes, there
Yeah.
is.
Wouldn't be surprised if there's 20 grand in each one.
No, there's 32,000 in the next section, and there's
70 at the end.
26.7 in the next, yeah, so it's a significant, but that is right now under the base, or maybe it isn't. I am having trouble reading the table at a glance, but.
Well, the base project is the Caltrans.
Yeah, I know, but it's in, you have the unit price, and then where does that show up? So those costs to put in irrigation in, in the sidewalk or in the street is one of the added
They're all
costs.
ad,
correct.
they're all ad projects.
And so that's one of the, I tend to agree with Larry on that one, that if we're going to landscape, we don't want to just have it be a whim and a
we
prayer
agree with
that we can have any of that survive. It really, it was really hard to get it on West Commercial with volunteers, and was partially successful, but certainly not
Maybe we should make it blue pipe.
a great success. And it's much harder for the plants there because we have them in pots. Anyway, I think it has to be a long-term solution, not a real.
Can somebody explain exactly what the temporary watering bags are? I mean,
I believe they're bags that they put underneath the ground that slowly release water out over time as a film.
because
Who fills them?
I've seen a product, and maybe it's not applicable, but it's not a bag, it's like a bottle, a container of some kind that you put into the ground and it.
Oya jars.
Or whatever, but it's a commercial product that, waters over time. And I'm just wondering if, it's kind of a crazy idea, but I wonder if it could actually work where you periodically have someone from Public Works just rotate, and just take one out, put the other one in, and they're gone. And that takes care of the irrigation. I don't know, is that even a feasible idea?
I'd use a water pill.
But that's for the trees, but with the bulb outs, you're gonna have shrubbery and whatever in there, that's my understanding of it. And so how are you gonna water that?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that if we use a water bag type concept, that instead of running pipes and irrigation and controllers and all this other stuff and spending a couple $100,000, if there is some kind of a device that can be just plugged in wherever something is growing of a suitable size, and it drains the water out as needed. I mean, I don't know all the details about it, but my understanding is it lets water out of the container as the ground needs the water.
Isn't ultimately the goal in planting this is that you plant perennials that live on their own? I mean, are we trying to put plants in here that take a lifetime supply of water?
We don't know because we don't have the shrubs.
We
Any idea of the
we have
shrubs?
not gotten to that point in the process of identifying plants and trees.
But they exist. I mean,
Well, I mean, we've
drought tolerant.
had, there's trees all up and down around the park, all over the place. None of them.
Yeah, but the
none
park
of them
gets
have-
water.
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
you're
it
right.
does.
But these things on Main Street don't get any water.
Well,
Yes,
I
they
know,
do.
but, well.
I mean,
you
I
know,
just,
I just think that's if you want to look down the road, you know, and it's going to be past my time in Willits, but I'm just saying that for generations, somebody's going to say, setting up here, why the heck when they did this, didn't they do that?
no, I think
Because-
you're right. You're right about that. But if we tell them we didn't do it because it was $500,000.
Well, too.
I think we want to be able to hear from the public, if anyone, but I also wanted to say that since we're probably going to revisit all this in 2 weeks, maybe we should not micromanage it tonight.
I don't think we're micromanaging. I think we're having an opening discussion of it.
It's important stuff,
And I think that
but we're going to
this
end
is
up.
this is something that we've spent a lot of money on, and I think actually trying to have this discussion with a map that's the size of my fingernail is sort of difficult. And I'm kind of curious as to the process. I mean, if ultimately we, the city, are going to be making these payments, what does it take to make changes to this design? 3 votes? Am I correct?
Yep.
3 votes changes this design?
Adrian, are you gonna, is this gonna be able to be given out to the community so they can see the cost of this?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanna, there you go, okay?
I did want to just note the most costliest items. Lighting standards is the #1 cost. And for all 4 zones, we're looking at an estimate of $820,000. And that is to replace not only the lights that are there, which are really highway lights, but to put twice as many in. So rather than 150 feet apart, put them 75 feet apart and bring them down to pedestrian level suitable for our downtown. Planting, this is not trees, just other planting would be $395,000. Question?
Okay. Last year when I was in Truckee, and I think I maybe have mentioned this to Adrian, there are light posts out in front of each one of the businesses. And it has a plaque on it that this was donated by whatever the particular business was when they put those in. And so they evidently, nobody knew because nobody was there at the time that knew about it in Truckee. But I would say from the plaque that, like my store, if it was able to have one, that Kimberly's would pay for the, not for the light, for the under stuff, but for the light itself. And I think that ought to be taken up, with the chamber or with the people that are in the community. I mean, this is one enough. I mean, the thing I keep going back to is this: we're not going to get another shot at this, and we need to do it right and the best that we can. And if you can't afford a light, there ought to be at least electricity there so that when you can save the money and put in a light, that you can put the light in. It's the same with the water. I mean,
Are the lights, I saw it in here somewhere, I thought they were $9,500 a piece. Did I make that up? Is that wrong? No, I'm not finding it.
10,000 apiece.
That's expensive.
So I guess that was just kind of, obviously, we haven't, nobody, they give us one picture of lights in this little deal here.
Yeah.
But that includes the trenching and the
But
conduit.
there are a couple different options on lighting that were talked about, and are
What number
pictured.
is lighting?
That is number 40.
40, no.
Okay, thank you.
So light standards, planting, trees, irrigation, storm drain modifications, and then one of the costly items, but it's only in one zone, is the signal light at Main and Commercial. And so what's being proposed there is a dedicated left turn lane from East Commercial, turning left onto Main. And pedestrian would cross separately from the left turn, so it would eliminate that conflict that exists.
This item 41, signal and lighting system, are those the traffic lights?
That's what she's
That's what
been
I'm
talking
talking
about.
about right now,
Okay,
right.
but they show it on all 4 sectors.
Well, the spreadsheet is the same on all 4, but not all 4 zones have items for each of those.
Well, but they do.
No, it doesn't extend out to
It has
the base project.
Oh,
They show that you get a price, but if you go over,
okay.
there's no cost associated with that. Caltrans, part of their project is to do software updates for that signal light. What we're pushing for is a complete replacement of hardware. And so that's something that's being negotiated right now.
Since there's not gonna be the traffic there, can we go with a 4-way stop there?
I think that was considered.
It was discussed.
What's discussed?
Well, it was discussed, I guess it didn't go very far. Didn't make it explain.
Well, it's not gonna be their street.
No, well, that's the thing, whatever.
That'll put in a lot of water supply or a lot of electrical.
I think people behave better at a 4-way stop than they do at a stoplight. So,
Well, you'll still need some sort of pedestrian signal, I think. Something that will allow the pedestrians to cross safely, have their own light. I don't see how that would work with the 4-way stop sign. But we'll discuss it.
So then, last week's living preview on the Main Street design concepts, there was a lot of feedback that was generated. I think that activity served its purpose. People came out, certainly people that had concerns from what they were hearing about different elements, whether it was on, in the downtown area or South Main Street by Brown's Corner, the roundabout. That really wasn't addressed last week. This was really focused on the portion that's going to be relinquished because we are on this accelerated timeline to get these design concepts to Caltrans as quickly as possible. So the last 3 pages of this have a summary of all of the public comment that was received from last Thursday, and it's broken down into the urban design elements, for example, the roundabout at Brown's Corner, center turn lanes, bike lanes, and street configuration, van lane, raised crossing, Valley and Main Streets, bulb outs, trees, landscaping, and planter boxes, and cross streets, one-way streets, and deliveries. So I know that the consultants have already started incorporating some of the feedback that was received last week, and we'll see that in the coming days and next week. WRT, they're the lead consultant. They're finalizing the charrette layout and conceptual plans. They're going to be adding some stop bars, removal of the bus stop shelter that's was illustrated in one of the, well, in fact, it's here in front of JD Red House, and just relocate that shelter somewhere else. Revised curb extensions, so the fire trucks were out making turns I think, in every direction at Humboldt and East Commercial Street to try the turning radiuses. And as a result, those are being adjusted.
See, does it, am I right or wrong here if you incorporate all of these adjustments to the design that are itemized here, does it pretty well make the design whole thing go away?
Well, these are just the comments that were received. Some of them are being incorporated, and some are, in fact, Dusty, I think you received some comments from GHD or Fair and Pierce.
We asked some of the traffic consultants to review some of these comments and provide some feedback. So.
Okay.
So that's something that we can also provide at the next council meeting.
I'm just trying to figure out how we proceed with this in kind of a logical and progressive nature to come to a conclusion. Is, you know, kind of get the, and I'm a little confused about how to do that. Do we have anybody in the public like to address this?
I may have a solution for your watering issue. Bill Barksdale. I was in Chicago recently, and I'm an early morning walker, and they have very verdant, abundant plantings on Michigan Avenue, and they do not use our automatic irrigation system. What I saw was a water truck early in the morning using non-potable water, going down to each planting, and they barely stopped with a big, like a giant shower head type of device that a guy held out over the things and watered each one of those places, and it was very efficient and quick. And one of the issues that I can see with our main street is we have a slip strike fault that goes down our main street, and it crosses somewhere near the post office. And putting in-ground irrigation there seems to me like kind of an invitation to broken water lines, which of course they're suffering within brook trails now at great expense because of their extensive watering system. And the water truck was a really elegant, efficient way to water all of these plantings all the way up and down Michigan Avenue. It would be inexpensive in comparison to an in-ground water system that was prone to breaking, and it worked great. All the plantings were doing wonderfully. In fact, I couldn't figure out how they were doing so wonderfully until I saw how they were watering them. And regarding the lighting fixtures, I was in Ashland just a few days ago, and of course Main Street in Ashland is still a highway, but it's also a bypassed town. And they left the tall light fixtures, and they now use those tall light fixtures to hang banners from that advertise events in town. And one of the things that's been coming up, and that did come up in the charrette process, was how do we start advertising what's in town? And they had beautiful banners, as anybody who's been to Ashland knows, that advertised the Shakespeare Festival and could also advertise the other features that are off of Main Street. And in between those tall light fixtures, those what you described as tall highway type of light fixtures, were the low light fixtures at human level. And they're very attractive. And that would eliminate the expense of having to tear out the tall light fixtures. They could be put to a good use. And the smaller light fixtures in between would give more sidewalk lighting. Just some suggestions.
Thank you.
Bruce?
Yeah.
Do you know what the average rainfall there is in the summer in Chicago?
It's a little wet back there, I think, yeah.
Well, they have a lake right next door, so they get a lot of water.
Yeah, I'm just saying that when you get back east, it rains almost every day in a lot of regions. And so, you know, and to my knowledge, I've lived here some years, and in the summertime, it doesn't rain a whole lot. But, you know, I mean, I just really, well, we'll talk about it one-to-one. Thank you.
Water trucks are kind of expensive too. Anybody else like to? Because there's no action going to be taken on this tonight. We're just interested in people's reaction and ideas. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Darlene Bixler, and I would like to make a comment, but I cannot see what you're looking at. So I don't have the pictures that you're visualizing. I would like to comment. I don't want to make a stupid comment that is not applicable. So, thank you for this.
Sure. I've got an extra one here. You're welcome to mine.
I'll take it.
Well, you don't have one?
So,
No, I just gave it to her.
I think Adrian said that she will be providing this for public information between now and the next meeting, at which, so that's part of why I made the comment I did earlier, that I think we will get more feedback after the public has actually been able to look at some of this.
I just received this afternoon
Yeah.
from consultants.
And I guess meanwhile, also, there are more discussions going on with Caltrans and our staff. But I think it's worth looking at whether a water truck, obviously involves labor and equipment over many, many years.
Forever.
Compared to something that's in the ground. But it might be cost effective to do that if it's really, really expensive up front and you're paying back a bond or something. So it's worth looking at that. And I was just also, on these comments, they're only the May 19th, but I know there were hundreds of comments on the charrette week, and I'm assuming that they are making sure that all of those comments are at least cataloged, but it doesn't mean that every comment is going to end up in the final plan, obviously. So these are...
So just a reminder that the WillitsMainStreetPlan.com has the presentations from the week-long planning fair, the opening night, and then the final night where the designs that were put together, the concepts that were put together from the feedback that was generated throughout that week. And they did summarize in some of their slides, the PowerPoint slides, those comments, but if you were there or saw pictures, they had hundreds of Post-it notes up on the walls, and they still have those. They did their best to, summarize them, but they have cataloged them. These comments, as you said, are just from last week's, because last week's activity was to show, full-scale models of what came out of the week-long planning fair.
Adrian, I just don't think we can take this thing up to the point that we're at and kind of be left without the consultants making a formal presentation to the city and no disrespect to Allison, but the GHD was the ones, I mean, she's kind of the project manager and the liaison to this thing, and I'm struggling a little bit that, I heard that they're kind of running out of dollars to put into this planning process. But to get this to this point and put it in front of the decision body and then be left with a picture that is, 1 inch to 100 feet is, and not even a presentation to walk you down Main Street and explain what's even happening at these intersections is I think a difficult culmination of this process.
I will request that the consultants are here along with Allison at the next meeting.
I think we need a big, Caltrans, we need a visual map or a visual deal. I think for me to try and discern whether the improvements at Wood Street are, going to be within the scope of what I think is, I want to buy for the city. I just can't tell what's going on here.
Understood. And that wasn't the purpose of tonight.
I understand that, but I just don't think that in the future, the next meeting, I think we need the people that did the plan to be here in front and give us their not only what are the improvements, but what are the rationalizations and why did you discount the not incorporate the comments that were critical of that improvement? And how did you arrive at this kind of a decision, these decisions? I mean, it's easy to just say, okay, I mean, it's fine, it looks good, do it, but I don't know, I'm having a hard, I understand this is the introduction, but I think we're gonna need a more, this is major project for us, and we're gonna need a good handle of what we're approving when we go to approve it, because it's looking to me, I mean, if we're just looking at the bottom line, I mean, not knowing, but it's Caltrans is pegged $3.4 million for this, and this is closer to what we pegged it at, right, Rod? Or you did, not we, but
Well, yeah.
6 point something or another.
I would point out that their estimate stops at essentially State Street.
Right, yeah.
It doesn't go beyond that, so there's a significant amount of paving that has to happen north of State Street. And
Right.
the quantity is about half of what Caltrans is at per tonnage of pavement, so.
This is even thinner pavement.
Well, they're using that Caltrans same design at 15 others.
Yeah.
So for the base project estimate.
So, okay. Well, it's a start. We had to start somewhere.
Right. And so I would like direction on which meeting to schedule this at. June 7th is the next meeting we were planning on having.
I would encourage June 7th.
Okay.
June 7th? Isn't that, aren't we the second Wednesday?
That's a Tuesday, and the reason for that is Sober Grad is happening on Wednesday. And so I think a couple meetings back, we had a discussion about the request that the school district had made, and there was consensus to move the meeting to June 7th.
Okay, so we're not meeting June 8th, we're meeting
That's
June
correct.
7th. Oh, okay. Oh, that's good to know. I don't
If
remember
you wanted
when
to do that on June 21st instead of June 22nd, that'd be okay too. I'm not going to be here June 22nd. Okay, thank you. Any other city manager reports?
Yes. We're going to be resubmitting, I think I've mentioned this at a recent meeting, the ATP grant application that we submitted last year for the Rails with Trails project. And Dusty, is that due June 15th? Thereabouts mid-June or June 1st?
Sounds right. I was at the MCOG track meeting this morning, actually.
Oh, good.
Again, receiving positive feedback on our potential qualification to get grant money for that project. So hopefully our second attempt will be fruitful.
Great. Good.
And then we are working on a transition plan for Rod's upcoming departure. And I'll have something back to you at the next council meeting on that.
Okay.
Sorry to put you on the spot again. And then in general, I just wanted to make you all aware, and I think you are somewhat aware that staffing-wise, we just have been incredibly short-staffed, either due to some vacancies or extended absences, and sometimes just simply, somebody is out sick for a couple of days, and it just makes it really difficult to cover the bases. So we just wanted you to be aware of that, want the community to be aware of it, and just ask for your patience.
Good. Let's move to department recommendations and finance. Looks like we got a new, somebody new to break in, huh?
We do. We received 8 responses to the RFP that was put out. We received them last, May 11th, and after those, we went through them, the city manager and staff went through them and narrowed it down to 3, called on those 3, and narrowed it down to the one that we are recommending. And I want to point out that we're only recommending these over our current auditors because our current auditors have been with us for 10 years. No complaints with our current auditors. And if we decided not to go with this firm, I would say let's stay with our current auditors because the amount of money that we are saving isn't worth training new auditors.
Well, I think as a matter of principle, it is good to change auditors from time to time just to get that into, another level of independent assessment. So, do they? They're obviously familiar with auditing public entities. Do they contract with any other of our neighbors?
They have done Eureka, Windsor, Fort Bragg. They don't currently do Fort Bragg, but they've done them in the past.
Okay.
Yuba City.
Plenty of experience.
Oh yeah, they have, I think,
list.
33 other cities they do
Okay.
in California.
I have a question. On this cost breakdown on the back page of the summary report, can you explain why fiscal year 17-18 is so much higher than the other years?
Because the 3 should be a 2.
So that should be 27?
Yeah.
Okay, and the 41,000 should be
31.
Okay. Because I was going to say, if they're going to do the auditing, that's some bad math.
Yeah, and it's probably not even 31, it's probably more in between 32 and 33, because then the discount doesn't work correctly.
Good, thank you. Well, also the discount itself, this $4,600 discount would actually be a $3,600 discount.
Right.
Okay.
So we're auditing them already.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see that.
We're watching.
Does anybody care to make a motion on this?
I'll make a motion that we approve the staff recommended action to contract with Moss Levy and Hartzheim.
I second it.
Any public comment on this change of auditors? Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Stransky?
Yes.
Strong?
Yes?
Orenstein?
Yes.
Mayor Burton?
Yes.
Okay, we'll bring back a contract with the next.
Okay, thank you. Chief is here earlier, but not here now.
His daughter was receiving an award tonight, so he snuck out with Holly.
Good for him.
Oh.
Or they were awarding scholarships tonight, not
Yes.
doing interviews for
Right.
scholarships.
No.
Right.
I'm a little behind the time there. Anything, Dusty, from Community Development and Planning?
Yeah, just briefly. I just want to take this opportunity to announce that we're going to have a public workshop on June 16th. That's a Thursday, starting at 5:30 here at City Hall in our community center to discuss the Willits Streets and Alley Connectivity Study. This is a separate but very much related effort to our Main Street planning process. The purpose of the study, again, is to look at the connectivity, circulation, and safety amongst our downtown streets, alleys, lanes, parking lots, as well as to look for opportunities to make improvements within our downtown area to make it a little bit more enjoyable for ourselves as well as some of our visitors. And again, the goal is to look to help out some of our downtown businesses, recognizing that we will have the bypass here soon. This project is working hand in hand with the Main Street project. For instance, we heard about some of the changes potentially to the intersections at Commercial and Main Street. Very happy with the coordination between our two consulting groups up to this point. Obviously, we're interested in moving forward at a strong pace as this project does relate to some of the improvements we're trying to do for our Main Street project that tie into, which we're hopefully going to tie into the Caltrans designs. I also wanted to tell those that attended our street fair this week, I wanted to say thank you. Definitely got to talk to a lot of folks and garnered quite a few ideas. So again, appreciate that participation. And hopefully we can get some strong attendance to our public workshop here on again, June 16th, 5:30, City Hall. Yeah. That's all I had.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks, Larry.
Public Works, this might be your last chance to have your way with this.
Air it out.
Yeah.
Make it good.
June 3rd, I mean, that's.
The list,
I know,
the
but
list is very
he's
long,
gonna-
so
He's going to,
I'll start at the top, though.
in some,
On the waterfront, Flushing, I believe, finished up today in this section of town, in the northeast section of town. So they were able to do the entire water system this year for the first time in several years, which should improve on our brown water issues as well as any of our disinfection byproduct issues which we've had in the past. Our latest results continue to drop. Our average is way down on our total trihalomethanes, so it's been nothing but positive. Clarence, working with Scott, Clarence has done a great job running the water plant, and everything seems to be operating very smoothly on the water side. So we're expecting Main Street Water Line Phase 3 to start June 20th. That's their probable start date. And so what that's going to do is push that budget, most of that budget, into the next fiscal year. And right now we're working with Water, Sewer, Public Works, and Engineering to get our preliminary budgets to Susie with some numbers, hopefully by the end of the week. Anyway, on the wastewater side, the septic receiving station is almost done. It's probably within the next 2 weeks. And Franklin Miller, the company that supplied the station, will be up to do the startup and get them set up with cards and do some training on how the system works. Or it's really just a unit, but that's all been done in-house, and it's going along really well. So,
Ron, on that, there'll be ability to meter that septage into the system as they want to?
as it comes in, it's metered.
I mean metered, but into the treatment system.
Yeah, the way it's being set up right now, it's going to make a long route into the treatment system, go from the septic receiving station to the old digester to the equalization basins or the old irrigation pond, and then make its way around to the headworks once we get rain in the winter, so it's diluted. So it'll be much more controlled.
Okay.
And the new blowers for the aeration basins got pushed back till next month for delivery, which is somewhat disappointing. But overall, that's a good. I can't remember the word I used. Monumental, but it's it's a big step for them to get some blowers that will actually function. We've had a lot of difficulties with Atlas Copco with the existing blowers and getting them to bring something that actually works. We've had them to the point where 2 start-stops and they quit working, so that really puts us in a vulnerable position with respect to processing and treating wastewater. So, on the public works side, I bet you've seen everybody around town. They've been doing a lot of work, and I would commend Bill and all the people in the Public Works Department for the amount of work they've been doing. We're trying to get a part-time seasonal parks worker to help keep up with some of the weed growth, thanks to our late rains and our wet winter. But if you see something, just be sure to tell Bill Wilson that he needs to go. I was just kidding. On the engineering side, the engineering department's been working with water and sewer quite a bit lately, and Andrea's working a lot on the budgets. Jeremy and Andrea actually went out and started surveying Main Street for this potential relinquishment agreement we may have with, or I'd say task sharing agreement with Caltrans on the design side, which does change the complexion of the relationship between Caltrans and the city with respect to design, and it could potentially lead to a lot more control over what's designed, a lot more control on the city's part from, say, California to State Street. That's what we're looking at right now. So, and that's all I have. Is there any questions?
Actually, you're saying about talking to Bill Wilson directly. If we observe, you're joking, do we go to Adrian for
Yes.
things like that?
Yes.
And then she,
Yes.
okay, good. Just
We
wanted
do
to-
not direct.
That,
We have one employee.
and we, not
that-
just council members, but public, if they see,
Well, no, we don't control the public, but Adrian is our sole employee. We don't direct
just wanted to make sure.
Public Works or engineers or anybody else don't work for us.
If you see them on the street, ignore them.
Pat on the back is probably be the best thing we could provide them.
A pat on the back, for sure. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That looks like that completes our department. Am I missing anything? I often do. Anything from MCOG?
No, you didn't meet.
LAFCO?
It's not here.
MTA?
MTA will be meeting tomorrow. Oh, you're skipping MSWA? No, I'm sorry. I'm skipping. Okay. MTA is meeting tomorrow. There's preliminary budget stuff and a new requirement to show the pension debt or whatever you want, obligation in the budget is changing things, but the budget basically looks pretty good. And tomorrow will be the first day that our new general manager will be with us at our board meeting. There are some other, there's also a grant that involves senior housing between Brush Street and over in that, I don't know exactly, I thought I had my packet with me, but I don't. It's off in that sort of northeast corner there.
Brush Street Triangle?
Yeah, but there's a senior housing proposal that has a lot of grant funding involved, and the MTA is partnering on that and hoping to get an electric bus that would serve that community, and they would also have a senior center facility there as well. Anyway, so there's a lot going on, and that meeting tomorrow is at 1:30 at the Convention Center in Ukiah.
Okay. Thank you. Now to MSWA.
As you may recall, at the last council meeting, I mentioned that MSWA will be discussing the future of MSWA. And our next meeting is on June 30th, so I prepared for you all a kind of an outline of, some of the discussion points, because I would really like to have your input, maybe at the next meeting.
Get one to Holly, too.
I gave an extra one for Holly.
Okay, great.
I think it's important because obviously it's an important discussion, and I'd like to get a sense of how the rest of the council feels about this. So you have some time to read through it. If you have any questions to clarify, please contact me.
Thanks for putting this together, Ron.
Sure.
Took some.
Actually, that came from Jerry Ward. I'm not going to take credit. I just rewrote it.
Okay, well, it's still.
And you chair that
Yeah.
committee now?
All right, League of California Cities had them. They met.
Yes.
Yeah.
Friday.
Last week.
Any report or all's well, doing well?
Holly attended the legislative committee meeting. Ron and I did not, but we were there for the main program, which was on the Valley Fire, presented by Sheriff Brian Martin. And it was really, he had video footage that he took himself of the fire in different spots. And the audio were numerous dispatch calls that came in, and it was really chilling to hear, people calling in asking for help and being told that they need to evacuate now, and people saying, I can't, I'm disabled, I live here, just things like that. It's really amazing that only 4 lives were lost. It's 4 too many, but it could have been so much worse in that regard. So the point of all of this is emergency preparedness.
Mm-hmm. It was an interesting presentation, and obviously the images of the fire and the description were
Shocking.
concerning, I guess. But for me, the most jarring comment that was made was in the beginning when the sheriff began his presentation, and he began with the statement that Lake County is the poorest county in California. Now, I wasn't aware of that. I thought it was a county, somewhere in the north or something, and it was like, wow, there are neighbors in the poorest county, and so, that sort of took me back a little bit.
Okay, good, thank you. Water and wastewater systems has not met. Revid Ed, hearing nothing, moving along. Finance has not met. On the JPA feasibility study for the wastewater plant, I just want to, we mentioned this at previous meetings, that I'd like to make sure that we send
That's been done.
a letter that says we are available for your next meeting. And maybe we even want to agendize it for a council discussion, because one of the, help me here, Adrian, because I might have forgotten one of the things that they kind of tasked they being the Brook Trails ad hoc committee to discuss the potential commingling of the wastewater services, one of the tasks was to list what would be the benefits of instituting a JPA or special district, whatever you want to call it. And I don't know, I personally have not been able to come up with many myself, but maybe it's my narrow-mindedness, and maybe we should have a general council agenda item on that to discuss what maybe others see more value in that concept and to take back to the table. But that was one of the takeaways of the last meeting, was to see what benefits each jurisdiction would feel from that. And we really haven't followed up on that with a full council discussion. Those of us on the committee had an opinion about that, but maybe it was a little too closed-minded for the rest of the council.
You'll be happy to know that after that meeting, I did some research into the subject as well, and I prepared another sheet that I will make available.
Geez. Oh, wonderful.
But it sort of gets it into perspective to see what's involved and pluses and the minuses, so it can help the discussion, I hope.
Okay, well, I just, it's, so we did send a letter to them that stated that we called the first 2 meetings, and
Right.
it's in their court to
Yeah.
call the next one.
And it was verbally communicated, so I'll follow up with them.
I'd like to, yeah,
Okay.
this, we need to do everything, don't you think, Jim?
Absolutely.
We need to do everything in writing.
Good idea.
Okay. Caltrans relinquishment project, we spent some time on that tonight. EDFC, anything there?
We met 2 weeks ago, just after our May 12th. And we're now, the full board is only meeting every 2 months. And there's a lot of loan activity, and I don't have those notes in front of me, but if anyone would like more information about what's going on with EDFC, talk to me and I'll pull out my notes.
Thank you. NCRA is not present this evening, so our next, well, I guess I'm going to skip council member reports and recommendation. Let's do the ordinance and then remind me to go back to it, and let's get the serious business out of the way before we do that. So we have what we have directed staff, city attorney in particular, to look at our nuisance abatement ordinance and try and streamline it and make it a more effective tool, fair to all concerned, and expedite the process. And so, Jim, do you want to kind of
Sure.
what you came through?
So I looked at lots of different ordinances, probably 15 to 20 different city ordinances, and then concentrated on the more newly drafted ones, and found a couple of cities that I thought did a nice job. City of Grass Valley and City of Carpinteria, and I kind of melded them into what you have in front of you, taking language from both. And one thing that is in this draft proposed ordinance that's missing in our existing ordinance is a hearing body that would handle the appeals and the hearings as opposed to the city manager being burdened with that. And in talking with John Sherman, he thought that was one of the obstacles we had to quickly get in compliance. It was difficult, given Adrian's workload, to get something set up as quickly as possible. And anyway, so that's one significant aspect of what you have in front of you, is that I'm proposing that there be a pool, perhaps of local attorneys who would serve on a rotating basis, persons who are not city employees, so there wouldn't be a perception of bias that would otherwise exist to having a city manager or a city department head adjudicating the issue of whether there has been a violation of a city code. And there would be some expense in that, and on the flip side, there would be a benefit by freeing up the city manager's time to focus on other issues. Another thing that I've noticed that there's been a trend in the last 10 years for cities to adopt code enforcement ordinances that use an administrative citation process for relatively minor offenses, and so we have a section in this proposed ordinance for that, and that's for it would operate similar to a parking citation and a fine being assessed and a swift opportunity for a review if someone objects to it. And John Sherman, I believe, thought that would be a big time saver as far as the minor violations. We also are addressing continuing violations, and some which relate to zoning and land use issues, and others that relate to more building structural issues, and have that in your draft. And that would give the hearing officers some specific remedies that they could apply to a case. This draft in front of you has a more detailed description of the appeal process and cost recovery process. And also reciting that there will be some occasions where it may be necessary for the city attorney to file a court action against a party. So this assignment originated from our discussion about marijuana cultivation and the delays that we've often experienced between citing someone with a notice of violation and ultimately getting compliance or not getting compliance and having fees accrue to very high amounts, and then ultimately there'll be a change of ownership in the property, and the new owner will come before the city council who has shown some sympathy toward that new owner, and then we've cut the fines. And so the objective is to not rely on escalating lengthy fines, but instead move toward abatement sooner. And in the case of cultivation, one of the challenges is that oftentimes plants are not visible from the sidewalk. They're not visible from the next door neighbor's property, and they're hidden, and access is denied. And so for code enforcement officer responding to neighbor complaints of odor, where we're pretty sure there's a big grow next door, we haven't seen any plants, and we have no photographs of them. What John Sherman would typically do would be to confront the suspected violator and ask for permission to enter, and if that's denied, and the area is in a place with a reasonable expectation of privacy, we can't just go busting through and chopping down plants. We have to go to the court. And so I would recommend that we would utilize a inspection warrant process where we put evidence before a judge, and if the judge grants it, he or she issues an inspection warrant that's then posted on the property, and law enforcement accompanies John and has the lawful right then to enter property over the objections of the property owner. That's something that we did this past summer, and we had mixed success with it. Another issue is summary abatement, and both the existing ordinance and the draft new ordinance discuss situations where there is an immediate or imminent threat to human health and safety that enables the code enforcement officer to enter upon property without notice, without due process, without going through those procedures. But that's really a rare situation, and it's reserved for situations where there is an immediate, imminent danger. For example, leaking above ground sewage or something that has to be taken care of immediately, and there's no time to go before a judge or to put it before our hearing body. And that's a procedure that was discussed in our existing ordinance and here again in the draft ordinance. So comments, particularly about what you think about a hearing body of paid persons who are not employees, and what other thoughts you might have.
Go ahead.
One question is, how much would this affect the commercial vacancy abatement? Does that come under here too? If we're looking at ways to address the vacant, sort of blighted commercial buildings, is that under this purview or not?
Not specifically. But we're talking about if there's a situation that is in violation of the city code, and if there's a condition that amounts to a public nuisance.
Public nuisance, yeah. That was what, I'm just wondering if this is a handle.
Not specifically.
Ron?
All right. As you recall, and I believe you mentioned it, this whole process was instigated by the marijuana ordinance. And as I read through it, I didn't see anything that addressed it until it came down to this summary abatement section. And what you just said, as you described it, kind of disturbs me a little bit, and I'd like to get a little clarification on that. Because as we found, the nature of marijuana is that if they get a complaint, and by the time, in the current situation, by the time we go through all the appeal process, it's been harvested and it's a moot point at that. So there's been no real benefit or purpose of even pursuing it because nothing ever happens. So I was looking at this summary abatement process as being the way to make it happen, but so what you mentioned was that one thing that would trigger it would be a neighbor not necessarily seeing marijuana growing next door, but smelling something and saying, you know, I think something's going on. And I believe you said that that's not necessarily enough to get our code enforcement officer onto the property. Is that correct?
Yeah, I said that if it's not visible, the situation would be to request authorization to inspect the property.
And how long does that process take? This is going to court, I assume, to a judge?
Before you would go to a judge for an inspection warrant, the code enforcement officer would first try to gain access.
Oh, yeah, I understand that. And obviously the guy would say no. So then
you're assuming the guy says no.
I am
For the
assuming.
purpose of your discussion.
For the purpose of my discussion, I'm assuming he'll say no, so now we have to go to a judge. So and how much time will pass before that can be, what is it, declared that you can, what does he get, a writ or?
An inspection warrant.
Okay, and how long is that typically?
Well, we would have to develop sufficient facts to bring before the judge, and hopefully we can do that, even though we don't have physical access to go onto the property. If we don't have evidence that would support the warrant, a judge isn't going to issue it. Just like if a police officer seeks an arrest warrant or a search warrant, they've got to put forth declarations showing their good cause belief of certain facts. And so it would be up to staff to develop the factual showing.
Okay, so on that, and I'm trying to get an understanding of how this all works. So a police officer will stop a car on the road for whatever reason, and as the officer is talking to the driver, he might smell, he might detect the odor of marijuana,
Ron, Can we just stick with not an analogy that goes off to something else? Can we stick with a situation of?
Well, I
don't
am.
really care what that police officer runs into. I'd like to.
No, I am, because that gives, I'm trying to equate this to the same thing when you walk by a house and you smell marijuana. You have a very strong inclination that there's marijuana going on there, just like the police officer can smell the marijuana inside a car. And that triggers the next step.
The distinction, I think, is that we're not talking about the criminal prosecution of code enforcement violators. And in your analogy, a peace officer's charged with that responsibility. And if he detects sufficient evidence and the smell or whatever, and has good cause, reasonable cause to an arrest, then he or she makes the arrest.
But if we have an ordinance in town that specifically prohibits the growing of marijuana, currently it's outdoor marijuana, that is, it's not a crime because it's a zoning violation. Isn't that the same thing as the automobile analogy? I mean, it's just laws, isn't it? Someone is breaking the law. Obviously, they're growing marijuana behind that fence outside the building. Therefore, he's in violation, I suspect. Isn't that, wouldn't that trigger the...
we're mixing up criminal prosecution with civil nuisance abatement. And in your analogy, if the officer has reasonable cause to believe that a crime exists, then he may need to get a warrant. Just because the officer smells marijuana coming from what he thinks is marijuana coming from a trunk of a car, he may or may not have the legal right to force the trunk open, to look at glove boxes.
Okay,
I think what my concern here, Jim, is, or my hope is, the intent of this whole thing was to try and narrow the timeline down from being a 90-day process to a 14-day or something. And do you think this ordinance will be able to?
I think this ordinance will help the code enforcement officer on a wide variety of cases, and particularly minor ones. If your interest and focus is what about marijuana cultivation, I can't really say that this draft that I presented to you will result in a swifter abatement than the ordinance that we have on the books. I think some staff policies could help. For example, it's a rare day that the city attorney files a motion with the court to enforce an ordinance, but that may just be the fastest way about it. And I think sending a letter to a violator from the city attorney's letterhead that we intend to do such and such and to hold you accountable for the costs incurred in this legal proceeding will probably get the attention of the violator or his attorney, and maybe we can get some cooperation. And if it doesn't happen that way, then we have the right to go in and get an inspection warrant, inspect the property, and then an abatement warrant, or either seeking an abatement warrant or seeking an injunction to compel someone to abate the nuisance. And that time frame hopefully will be quicker than the administrative process with all the appeals.
Plus we have the added commitment from the district attorney that he will enforce whatever ordinance that we put on the books. We have him on tape saying that, right?
Well, I think he's referring to grows in excess of 24 plants.
Yeah.
Well,
I'd like to finish if I could. I mean, I'm concerned. I mean, I felt that this whole thing was going to be addressing the marijuana situation that right now is ineffective. I don't care how this ordinance is written. We can't enforce it in any practical manner because of the time frame. And it doesn't sound to me like this is going to help the situation any.
Well, we have to abide with due process. We can't just bust into people's yards without due process.
Well, you're probably right, but right now we're smelling marijuana in our neighborhood right now, and it's May, and they just planted this stuff about a month ago, and already it's starting somewhere across the creek, and I don't know where it is, but it's starting to pervade the town. And if we can't do anything about it, then there's no point in even trying to do anything about it.
There may be some scenarios that are so severe, so egregious, that summary abatement is warranted in the case of cultivation. But if you'll indulge me for a second, I'll read you just a little blurb out of this League of California Cities handbook on what kind of cases are appropriate for summary abatement. It says, the choice between pursuing administrative or summary abatement lies with the seriousness of the violations and the imminent risk of harm. In most code enforcement cases, the department is well advised to use either a judicial or administrative hearing process to obtain an order that justifies its actions. Yet summary abatement may have to be used in rare emergency cases. A summary abatement situation exists when conditions are so severe and immediate action is required without time to seek a court or administrative order. Such a scenario could occur with a sewage leak, structural damage caused by a fire, an earthquake, or other natural disaster. Code enforcement staff should limit summary abatement to alleviating only the immediate dangerous conditions. So that's the standard, and it's conceivable that that may apply to a cultivation case in a rare circumstance, but I think in your average outdoor grow that's offensive to people living nearby, I don't think that rises to the level of an immediate situation that allows us to dispense with due process.
All right.
So you really didn't find anything in the, I mean,
No magic bullet.
did not find a way to really accelerate, I mean, we're not trying to circumvent due process, but expedite due process.
Right.
Well, maybe then, the proper solution might be going back to, what I had originally proposed the last time we talked about this is, if we embrace it and license it, and if they don't have a license and they're growing it, and they can be shut down immediately. And if they do have a license and they're growing it improperly, they can be shut down immediately. Isn't that what a licensing procedure entails?
I don't believe that it's that simple.
Well, I don't know. I'm asking our attorney. You're nodding your head.
There's a procedure to allow the licensing of cultivation.
No, I'm saying if you allow licensing and you put conditions on the licensing that it can only be grown in a certain way, with no odors and, all kinds of conditions. You can do that when you set up a license procedure, correct?
That's something I didn't,
okay.
I'm not prepared to answer for you tonight.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I think there's a bigger picture here than the enforcement of marijuana grow violations. And, I think our code enforcement officer has struggled we've sat here and had a lot more discussion about chickens. Was it a rooster or was it a hen?
Yes.
We've had discussions about barking dogs. We've had discussions about
Garbage.
on the property, and unlivable structures. We have, abandoned vehicles, a myriad of those other things, and I believe that we need to upgrade our ordinance so that our code enforcement officer has a little more tools. And quite frankly, I don't like seeing a $25,000 fine being assessed against a property because it went on for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months at $100 a day or whatever those things, whatever those numbers are. I think you need to get to the deal as quick as possible. I think that the notion of the city attorney sending, a letter to the landowner or the tenant. One of my questions is still, is it, if you're a landlord renting to somebody, is the violation a tenant responsibility or is a landlord responsibility?
It's both. We can pursue enforcement against the owner as well as the tenant.
I think the ability to, essentially sell or factor that fine off and not get into the collection business. I mean, that's addressed in here. I think that's is a big advantage to the process, really. Yes.
So with the two pieces that have come out from the legislation in the way I have read it, and maybe I've read it wrong, is that the city has a right to say, we don't want these things in our community. We don't want somebody to be able to sell marijuana on the open, off the street, in a store and whatever. and we don't want any of those kind of things. And that's either gonna work or not work. And I'm sure that it'll go to court many times before they finally settle it. But that's the whole crux of, in my estimation, of the two pieces of, I can't think of the name of them right now, 466 or 204 or
There's three of
whatever.
them, actually, the
Okay.
Medical
Anyhow,
Marijuana Act.
It just states that the city has a right to say, you know, we don't want any of this stuff. And so if they do it, you mean you have to wait 90 days to close them down?
Are you talking about a commercial operation of
Yeah.
a dispensary? No, you don't have to wait 90 days. If someone is operating an illegal business that, a business that's not in a zone that's not allowed, or maybe it's not allowed in any zone,
Okay.
we
so
can seek to
it's
shut
real
that down.
hard for me to visualize, and I know that I'm not visualizing very well, is that if somebody is growing something and you can smell it and you're the neighbor, and it's against the law that the city has put up that you can't grow it outside, and that's the way it is right now. You have to contain it in a building that when you can't open the doors or any of this kind of stuff, you can't be able to smell it. And so that's been in effect for a lot of years. And if you can smell it, I mean, that's the same thing to me. The city has said, no, you can't do that. So, but that's not true.
No, I'm saying that we have to have evidence. We have to have proof. And
smelling doesn't do it.
You know, I'd like to see photographs. I'd like to have a
Can we can the odor and give it to the judge? I mean, I think it's something we gotta, do we have to test our ordinance with the court then? Is that the way to do it, is to, nobody, I was hopeful that somebody else had charted this ground to make enforcement expeditious, but if it hasn't been done, then I guess.
I've looked at a lot of city code enforcement ordinances in the last couple of months, and I didn't see anything specific to outdoor cultivation. It just, they all speak of, in generalities, of code violations and methods to abate them, but I don't see any, I haven't found any ordinance that's unique to cultivation.
Even those cities that have banned it, they don't, what enforcement are they using?
I don't believe that I cross-checked it that way by coming up with a list of cities that ban cultivation and then looking to see what their particular code enforcement.
I think we ought to take a look at that.
Okay. It might be helpful to have this discussion too with John present.
Yeah, that's good. Holly, come on up. We're about ready, I think we're about ready to wrap it up, but.
Well, there's closed session.
There is. So, yeah, I'd like to follow it up, Jim, with those communities that have done it and what tools they're using.
What I wanted to say is that obviously Jim is approaching this as any public nuisance type of activity, not just the outdoor grow question. But the same thing could be true how much time it took us to deal with the roosters and the garbage. So making that streamlined applies to all of those things. But what I'm hearing from some of my colleagues here is that with the outdoor grow, the abatement of it has to be timely or else it's meaningless. Because if you're a neighbor and you complain in May and then it takes till August or September for the wheels of justice to move, then by that time you've been exposed to it for 3 or 4 months and the guy can just harvest and leave.
And the rooster really is the same way. I mean, if you're dealing with that if you're dealing with a bad neighbor, 2 days of it's all you really can handle, not 3 months.
And there has to be due process, but as efficient as we can be to
Right.
And I'm afraid I ran out of steam and didn't read all of it.
So I think we continue this discussion with John's here, and maybe we get to do a little more research on it. Okay. Do we have any public comment we wanted to weigh in on this item? So we will now back up to council member reports and recommendations. Does anybody have anything there, or good and welfare? Put them together, get it out in one fell swoop.
Yeah, I apologize. I was required to provide awards at the high school awards night. I just want to say that my back of the napkin tally, which is not accurate, was north of $70,000 that was donated by our little town, including Rotary and the Community Foundation and Frontier Days. I mean, the Sober Grad Committee had just a ton. And it's so, it's rewarding to see our community give back. Many of the people go on and make their fortunes in the world and have now decided to come and give scholarships back here. So I think it's very cool.
It's a highlight of the season. Absolutely.
It is, absolutely.
We do have one item tonight under closed session, publicly pursuant to Government Code 54957, public employee appointment, interim chief operator at the wastewater plant. Do we make that appointment or make any decision in closed session and be reported out into here immediately thereafter? Thank you for joining us tonight. See you in 2 weeks. Second Wednesday of the next
But
Tuesday.
that's going to be